Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Johnson. I'm one of the scheduling consultants here at Encore Group. Today's webinar is Managing Schedule Specifications to Avoid Claims. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to our sponsor, Project Networking, and for our panelist, Charlie Jackson with Project Lifespan. Before we get started, let me cover a couple of housekeeping issues. On your webinar panel, there's a dialog box for asking questions. Feel free to shoot a question out and I will respond to those during the session and or turn them over to John. If you have a hand raised, I'll get to that in just a couple minutes. And if we can't get to those questions after the webinar is over, we can give you a phone call or respond to those afterward. Also on your control panel toward the bottom, there's a section that says handouts. And you can go ahead and download the handout if you'd like to follow along. After the webinar closes, a survey will be sent out to you, which will have a link to that handout again if you want to get it later. It also have a link for you to complete a certificate of attendance for you. And then finally, this webinar will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel, so if you'd like to check it out later or send a link out to a colleague who may have missed it. Because we have a full webinar, we're going to leave the microphones on mute, and again, please utilize the question section and we can respond to those. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Jackson, our speaker.
Thank you, Dan. We do appreciate you attending today, all of you, and I want to welcome today Charlie Jackson, who happens to be my brother. He and I have worked together for many years. I work at Encore Group. Charlie is with Project Lifespan, and we partner a lot on various types of projects. And I wanted to bring Charlie in today because a big portion of his work is helping organizations develop specifications, and particularly related to software deployment, software-specific type specifications to help ensure that the clients get the kind of data that they need to best suit their project. So I'm happy to have Charlie here with me today. I think you'll have a lot of good information to hear from him. But before we get started, I would like to just find out some information about your organizations. I do these at the beginning of each of our webinar just to get some information on who is in attendance. So I would like for you, if you would, from your panel, if you would answer the current poll question asking about your role in the construction industry. Have a chance to check that. Give you just a couple more seconds here. Appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions. This helps us as we go through the webinar to try to develop around the audience. Okay, I'll go ahead and close this poll. As you can see, we have a good group today representing owners, and 60% owners. Let's do the next question is, what best defines your role on your projects? What best defines your role? Project management, controls, engineering, or estimating? Okay, we'll close that. And you'll see we have a wide variety, project management and project controls, primarily in attendance today. And let's just do one more. Have you or your organizations updated your scheduling specifications in the last year? All right. So the majority of the attendees have not updated in the last year. It's not always essential to update your scheduling specifications every year, but at least going into a review can be at least once a year to take a look at what's going on with your specs can be very helpful. Let's get started this morning. Those of you who have attended any of my webinars previously know that I do this slide quite a bit, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but just want to remind, I've seen this slide for many, many years, and it gives a good description of the phases of a project, and so I repeat it quite often. It's the love is blind phase, the honeymoon phase of the project. You have the crisis phase of the project where things start going bad. You have the blame phase where the letters start going back and forth. Punish phase where staff changes take place in a lot of cases. Then you finally have the hallelujah, it's over, can't wait to do it again phase. And the reason I wanted to bring that in to this presentation today, just to remind you that the best opportunity you have to resolve issues is at the beginning of the project. And there are so many things that happen that I experience on jobs. I know Charlie experiences a lot of the same things, where issues that surface don't get dealt with in a timely manner. And one of our main objectives today, and you'll hear it throughout this course, is setting up specifications obviously as early in the project. But not only getting good specifications early in the project, but designing and implementing specifications that help the project teams deal with issues early in the project. Because we know, those of us who have been around for a long time, we know that most issues surface at the beginning of a project, whether it is differing site conditions, design issues, management issues. A lot of these, just getting things ramped up. Most issues surface at the beginning of a project, and this is where I find most issues surfacing and the least amount of documentation or the least amount of processes in place to help deal with issues. So as we go through today, we'll keep this in mind, and we'll be talking about those early phases of the project. Just as an intro regarding specifications, I remember 30 years ago when I first started doing this type of work, scheduling and working with construction schedules, specifications were fairly minimal. A lot of times just a single paragraph with a brief description of doing a schedule. But the technology obviously has been a big factor. Back in those days, hardly anyone had a computer in their project trailer, and I was the only one in mine. And now everyone has it. So technology has changed the scene. The economics of projects has changed it. Efficiency, being able to model efficiency, has been a big factor. But probably the biggest factor has been legal applications, and most lately, has been the financial reporting. Legal application in the sense of trying to avoid claims, trying to limit or minimize the claim process through the specification development. And then more lately, I've seen clients who are trying to implement financial reporting internally, whether they're receiving schedules from contractors to implement into their system, or whether it's a contractor who is trying to coordinate multiple schedules across the enterprise for financial reporting. And so all of those different efforts, whether it's an owner trying to implement procedures or contractors trying to implement procedures, those issues can collide, or those scenarios can collide if good specifications aren't in place to help both parties work together and get a good schedule in place. So what I want to talk about first is the steps in putting good specifications together. And there's just basically two of them in general. Number one, an organization needs to define objectives, right? So, two common objectives is you want to finish on time and you want to avoid claims. But the process of going through as an organization, the process of going through defining those objectives will help you in developing your scheduling specifications. Developing a roadmap. Here are the things that we want to address. Here are the issues that concern our organization. Here are general issues from construction in general. Here are the objectives, and then laying out a specification roadmap that follows and meets those objectives. I'd like Charlie just to talk about some of the specifications, some of the assumptions that you make going into specifications.
Thank you, John. I wanted to again thank John and Dan for allowing me to participate in today's webinar. And John, speaking towards scheduling specifications as they relate to our industry, the construction industry. And when we discuss scheduling specifications, we're making a couple of assumptions. Those assumptions are that an owner is going to require that the contractor to submit a schedule, an initial schedule, and then follow up with that from that initial schedule with frequent updates. And when we say an initial schedule, we may be discussing a preliminary, a 90-day schedule or a 60-day schedule in order to start construction while the actual schedule itself, the project schedule, is being developed. So an initial preliminary schedule might be required during the course of the baseline preparation or the project schedule preparation. And then monthly updates. And when we talk about updates, we mean both what I call formal updates and informal updates. A formal update might be that update requirement where the contractor goes in and they input the work progress up to date and then make any modifications or would address any modifications for future changes. Those updates would then be submitted on a monthly basis typically. An informal update would be the schedule progressed and submitted on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, typically a hard copy of the schedule that's submitted again for weekly performance and reviewed on a weekly basis. And that is based on the project schedule, usually using either a filter or what we call a look-ahead schedule. So those are the updates that we're referring to, as well as the initial schedule. Also, we're saying, too, that the owner is going to require an electronic file submission. Now, I've seen several specifications where the owner does not require an electronic, they require only a hard copy submission. Typically, we recommend that an electronic submission be included in the specification for two reasons. It allows the owner to, or the owner's representative to review the contractor schedule in full, and you're not having to make assumptions on the contractor's logic or the contractor's constraints that they've enforced into the schedule. You're not having to rebuild that. It allows you to analyze potential or actual delays. And this can only be done when you utilize an electronic submission. And the submission should be used or utilized, the contractor should utilize the owner's software, the owner's format. Again, the benefit for this is it allows the owner to incorporate the contractor's schedule into their overall program, to analyze their overall program, because we're not just talking about one project typically as an owner. We're managing a program of projects based upon our budget requirements, etc. and the contractor schedule, that one schedule needs to fit within our program to manage our budgeting constraints, and then again for analysis purposes. So those would be the schedule assumptions based on our requirements. Other requirements that we have as far as general requirements are, again, owner schedule requirements and owner schedule standards. In order for the contractor schedule to comply and to meet our budgeting requirements, our reporting requirements, the owner is going to have some specific goals, some specific guidelines for the contractor to meet. Again, one project falling into the program of projects. Also, the project scope is going to affect the general requirements. If the project is a high-level project, or whether the project is a complex project, high-risk project, we've seen it where owners may want to manage the near critical versus critical. So the owners and the scope of the project might affect the overall scheduling requirements. And then the industry standards, those standards that are typical or would be general to specifications. So, for example, acceptable logic considerations, whether we're allowing finish-to-start relationships or finish-to-finish, etc. How do we want to manage those? Are we allowing lag, and what type of lag? If we're going to allow that, what type of lag? Activity duration. Should an activity be longer than, for example, 3 working weeks? Is it manageable? Are we looking at the correct or appropriate level of detail? Are there phasing considerations, and what are those considerations, and how should they be based? For example, access to work areas, land acquisition, right-of-ways, traffic controls. These are items that need to be reviewed and called out in the specifications so that we have the appropriate level of detail to communicate not only between the owner and the contractor, but between all of the key stakeholders. Again, all of these considerations should be clearly defined, if not understood by all the stakeholders, and included in the project schedule in order to manage both contractor and owner specifications. So some of the specifications to consider and some of the issues that you might encounter in developing your scheduling specifications: calendar management. The contractor should not only include calendars that are associated with their work days, but they may also include non-work days, whether they're owner non-work days, contractor non-work days. They may also include calendar days versus work days. Global versus project data. Most of the softwares now that are on the market, standard softwares, will have both global data allowing you to manage a program internally, as well as project level data. These two levels of data types, if you will, need to be looked at, considered when developing your scheduling specifications in order not to override specific data. Delay notification analysis. What are the contract requirements as far as notifying of delays or changes? Reporting requirements and critical path and float. Who owns the float should be clearly defined in the spec, and everyone needs to understand that. Activity data, resources, resource management, and we'll look at that in more detail here shortly. But these are some of the items that you want to consider in the specifications, and everyone should be on the same page initially. And we'll talk about scheduling meetings and how to coordinate those meetings and coordinating information between both the contractor and the owner. So when we look at the best quality possible information, we're looking at the scheduling representative. Who's going to be representing the contractor? What's their qualification? What's their background? What's their job experience as it relates to this type of project? Again, another item that's shown here is the calendars, global calendars versus, or standard calendars versus project-specific calendars to keep the quality of the information that's being submitted by the contractor in line with the information that's expected from the owner.
Now, Charlie, I think probably the biggest issue that we deal with, and I know I talked about this quite a bit, I put this on the slide. I wanted you just to talk about it a little bit just because of the calendar issue. I probably run into more calendar issues on schedules that as far as support, helping clients, phone calls to our support desk things, calendars is probably one of the biggest issues. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it's because of specifications that, one, either don't deal with how calendars should be managed, or they have specifications that will cause manipulation of the calendars, or use of too many calendars, multiple calendars, that will really make the scheduling process difficult, especially determining delays. I've had scenarios where the contract required almost a different calendar for each crew. I would try to establish a delay analysis. I'd plug a delay in that was clearly a 5-day delay, but because of calendar issues, it would only show 1 day or show 20 days just because of calendar variation. So those are kind of those are ways calendars or your specifications provides you an opportunity to help keep your scheduling process very clean. And I agree. Those two issues, making sure that a contractor has a good scheduling representative that understands the scheduling techniques, and then avoid using or put good calendar specifications or good specifications in there to try to ensure quality as much as possible. When you think about it, most specifications are developed because of delays, because delays occur, and not too many schedulers I know do it for fun, although I get as much enjoyment out of it as just about anyone could. Almost all of these specifications that we're talking about are developed somehow because we have to identify delays and quantify the delays in the process. So one of the challenges is preparing for those specifications. You know that delays are going to occur. So I typically will break out my specifications that in dealing with delay into these four steps. And these are 4 basic risk management steps. If you look at right out of a risk management model, number 1, you prepare for the delay. And so developing good specs that will help you, you know they're going to occur. So how can we get good documentation in place so that when they occur, we can identify it early, have a good specification in there for notification under the identification, once the delay is identified, have good specifications for analyzing the delays, how they're going to be resolved. I see a lot of specs that will specify one type of delay analysis, and rarely does one type fit all. One type of analysis fit all. And then obviously good specs that help you resolve the delays early. So in those, looking at that, there are some issues associated with delay that are you can put into your specs. Number 1, how to deal with early completion schedule. And it's interesting. I find most people would love to finish the job early. Even owners would appreciate it if the contractor would finish early. But it's difficult to know what happens when a delay occurs in an early completion schedule. So there's a lot of different types of specifications out there. You can specify that if the contractor shows an early completion schedule, you change the contract time. I saw a specification the other day that said if the contractor showed a schedule completing more than 20 days early, a change order would be issued to change the milestone date. Some specifications will just reject an early completion schedule, saying you have to show the finish date on the contract time. Or sometimes there are specifications that will say you have to, you can show an early completion schedule, but any delays prior to the contract time will not be eligible for extended general conditions cost. So there's several different ways to manage that early completion schedule. One of the best ways I know is just good schedule management. If a contractor is showing an early completion schedule, most of my clients want that to happen, right? So how can we do that and still protect our risk? And one of the best ways is just good management techniques, good monitoring techniques to find out what was truly a delay, what is where were the owner delays, where were the contractor delays, and good identification of the issues early. So once again, the idea is to define your objective. You know, do we want to encourage early completion, but yet at the same time protect our risk, or are we not? We want a fixed date. How do you want to see that project finish? And then define your float specifications accordingly, based on how you define that objective. So one of the first steps in doing that is get a good plan in place. A good objective is to get a good plan in place as soon as possible so progress can be monitored. Unfortunately, I have projects that I work on that, you know, the baseline goes on for months and months and months without approval, and it makes it very difficult, particularly when delays occur in those early months, to address them. And you're almost certainly going to be headed for some kind of dispute if you don't have those early issues documented. And so one of the best approaches is to get a plan in place as soon as possible so progress can be monitored. And when I say get a plan in place, I'm actually talking about a good plan. Here's a couple of simple specifications you can add to a spec section that will help get a good plan in place and help you meet that objective of getting a good plan in place early. Very simple. Number one, schedule meetings during the baseline process. Scheduling meetings early in this process, number one, as we talked about a while ago, that's the best time of the project when most people are getting along, most people are trying to work together. You can define in the specs some schedule requirements meetings. Here's an example, you know, where a client has a spec that says, hey, once we get the pre-construction meeting, we're going to have a schedule coordination meeting and get all the parties together and just talk about how we're going to go about doing the schedule, how we're going to go about, you know, developing these calendars, how we're going to, you know, manage all these issues, make sure everyone's clear, get to meet the parties, start developing the relationship between the person who's preparing the schedule and the person reviewing, so that you can get an idea of the quality of personnel. And then another good specification is to have regular meetings. Just schedule a weekly meeting after this preliminary review meeting. Have a weekly meeting prior to baseline submittal, so that all the parties get together, they review the schedule and review the progress on the present preparation of the baseline schedule. That's one of the best specifications that I know of. It does so many good things. If an owner tells the contractor, we're going to meet every week after our pre-construction meeting and look at your baseline schedule and see how the progress you're making, that gives you as the owner the opportunity to work with that contractor, get your issues that you're concerned about, get those put in the schedule. Any of the issues that may benefit the project, you're able to talk about it. It's an opportunity for everybody to work through the entire project and address any issues. It also helps the owner get through the review process much quicker. By the time the baseline gets submitted, you've actually had a chance to see it, review it. You already know what's in it pretty much, and your review process gets cut way back just so because you've already reviewed it. Those are two very, very good steps to getting a good plan in place as early as possible. And it helps that communication process, once again, early on in the project. And it'll help you avoid having that delay in getting a baseline approved and the lack of management of those early delays that may occur.
And John, in relation to, certainly in relation to the communication process, the key is good communication. The key is understanding what's happening in the schedule and documenting what's happening in the schedule, making sure everyone's on the same page. And that's where we get into good update specifications. So as we've already mentioned, if the schedule is being submitted on a regular basis, whether it's hard copy or whether it's the electronic formal submission, we need to establish some standards as far as how that schedule is updated and how the information is communicated. So as we're talking about the schedule update, we realize that actuals are going to be entered into the schedule, but what happens when we get work that's out of sequence, work that did not occur according to the original plan? We typically recommend that if work has not happened according to its original plan, the contractor or the scheduler needs to go in, modify actual performance, actual sequence to reflect what we call as-built logic or as-built work order. And then what about if the contractor or the scheduler wants to change? What if the project is going to change? We know that down the road we're going to have some changes. If we have regular scheduled meetings, we obviously discuss that, but how do we incorporate those changes into the schedule? What's allowable as far as changes? What types of changes are allowed for future work? Regardless, all changes, whether they're past changes, whether they're future changes, all changes need to be documented. Documentation is key. Communication is very important. And that documentation, that communication should be explainable by the contractor, that you be prepared to explain what's happened or what is going to happen and explain the whys. So the objectives, obviously, again, the important objective is to monitor progress, and monitoring that progress means good communication, good documentation, both for the scheduling specifications to support or to initiate the schedule, and then good documentation to support the progress, what's happened, what's going to happen, that supports our goals, our requirements. Regular scheduled meetings, regular scheduled submissions, everyone's on the same page, and it minimalizes, if you will, as much as possible the risks that we know are going to happen on the project.
Yeah, Charlie, I find that this next slide is one of the key slides that I use in a lot of my training, certainly with our scheduling staff and with clients. You know, the key question is, what does on schedule really mean? And this needs to be defined in the specs. So many specs will say, if you're showing the end date, or if the end date in your schedule moves out past the contract time, you'll have to come up with some type of recovery plan. And I've seen so many occasions where the schedule is falling behind on what they said they were going to do last month and what they're going to be doing this next month. They're not hitting their dates, but yet they're borrowing time from the end. They're resequencing activities, reducing durations or whatever to still show that schedule with the same contract completion time. So defining what on schedule really means and incorporating that into the specifications is very important. On schedule, my approach to that is, if you're not hitting the dates that you said you were going to hit last month over the last updating period, then you're not on the schedule. And then that's at the time, that's the actual progress that should be monitored, not just the end date. And that can be addressed in the narrative. So, you know, key things to review in that and to put into your specs. Number one, we do want to look at the completion date. The completion date still is a big factor. But the other issue that needs to be addressed, in particularly in the updating process, is the progress on the critical path. Did the schedule dates, were the schedule dates hit? Were they accomplished in a timely manner or as planned? And if not, what were the causes? And so having those specifications that delineate between what on schedule really means. Let me give you an example of that. You know, here's an analysis of establishing milestones in a schedule. Here's one way to do that. You can let the contractor define their milestones. I recommend that contractors do this themselves, but you can actually put it in a specification to do it, where you identify the milestones, whether it's you establish them after the baseline submittal, once those milestones are established in the baseline, then they are monitored on a monthly basis. And you identify delays, you identify problems much earlier doing this. For example, if you have these managed milestones identify delays, you can see in this example where milestone B slipped out. It took them longer to do that, and adjustments were made to show that milestone C is still going to be kept. Well, when you see those types of things, you know immediately that the schedule is being compressed through resequencing or whatever. So identifying those types of things and putting the specs together that help identify these will certainly make your project go much, much better. Let me give you a good example of another good objective. Is effective delay mitigation. Once again, I see a lot of specs that will say, hey, if the contractor schedule is showing late, then you have to submit a recovery schedule. And a lot of times the owners, for whatever reason, they stay out of that process. And I encourage organizations to obviously stay engaged, whether, as we talked about earlier, in the meetings, the scheduling meetings, in the progress meetings, the update meetings to review the schedule, but especially if you're looking to mitigate delays that have occurred, right? If it's a delay that's in dispute, if the contractor is saying it's an owner delay, the owner is saying it's a contractor delay, still both parties can get together, look through a mitigation plan or an acceleration plan, and identify it. Once again, if it's done early enough, and this can be spelled out in the specifications exactly how this gets done, if it's done early enough, you can usually get a recovery plan or mitigation plan, acceleration plan in place that both parties have participated in and both parties have come out with a good resolution. But once again, you can only do this if you're dealing with issues early. So you have to identify, having those milestones in place like we talked about so that you can identify delays early. You can come up with a solution to work through it. Here's an example of a delay that occurred in a schedule, and the contractor and an owner sit down, they work through, they look further down the project on the critical path for the lowest risk activities and see how they're going to address it. So many times an owner that I work with can sit down with the contractor and say, that activity right there, I can direct you as the owner to do that work in a different way as long as I'm willing to pay for it. So you direct these items down the road that are low risk, that have the least amount of cost to recover, and you're able to recover or accelerate and minimize the risk on the project. So I think that's very important, once again, to develop your specs so that you can identify these issues early. These are examples of where good specs will help you work through that. The key is, no matter how large the specification section, you really can't guarantee schedule quality, but sometimes it's very difficult. But the key is to get those specifications in place to get the best quality that you can in order to manage a project. The key is, if you don't have a good schedule going in, it's going to be hard to get a good quality product coming out. I just wanted to close out looking at some problem specifications. A lot of problem specifications come about from whether it's an attempt to control the specification or control the claims process through the specifications, or maybe one type of approach that is being attempted to or is being implemented that just doesn't necessarily fit a specific problem. I've listed some of these, and Charlie, I wanted to kind of go over some of these with you. I know you and I have talked about these quite a bit. There are some specifications that can cause problems. They include specifications that restrict contractor updates. They will limit the contractor's ability to keep the schedule current. I have specifications that will not allow a contractor to make changes to logic, for example, within reason, and subsequently schedule gets out of the schedule gets out of accurate. It becomes inaccurate right away. Another approach, another problem that I see is the one-size-fits-all approach to resource loading. Charlie, I know you just spent some time, quite a bit of time, put together a paper on good specifications to getting the type of resource loading that a project needs. Did you? What were some of your main findings there?
So what this particular owner was looking at was scope of the project. So not necessarily saying that every schedule was going to have a resource loaded requirement, but we're saying in this particular case, any project that was over $5 million in contract dollars was going to be resource loaded or cost loaded. So your resource loading and cost loading is going to depend upon the type of project. It's going to depend on the resources that you're looking to track. If the project is heavy in concrete or earthwork moving, then we may want to have specific resources to monitor, as you mentioned, performance. So we're looking at the ability to plan for project performance based on resource loading, resource requirements. So it depends on the project. It depends on the complexity of the project. But again, it's not this one-size-fits-all approach. Let's load all resources. We have to really think about that. We have to think about the effort regarding loading resources into the original schedule, as well as the effort it's going to take to monitor that resource load.
Right. Yeah, you know, another issue is that I come into contact with quite frequently lately is WBS structures, you know, that an owner will try to implement for whatever reason, whether it's implementation or some type of migration with or integration with financial data or whatever. But the required WBS structures can hinder a schedule development, particularly in Primavera products. You know, a good organizational structure is important in developing a good schedule. So you want, as an owner, you want to be careful implementing procedures that will make it more difficult to, even though you may get the kind of reports that you want, but you can also hinder the contractor's ability to develop a good schedule. And another issue,
and that would apply to both applications, actually, to Primavera and Microsoft. Manipulation of the WBS does have impact on the schedule and the owner.
Right. Yeah, calendar manipulations. Once again, I discourage organizations from putting weather days in a calendar. You know, anticipated weather days that are difficult. You know, that make it difficult that you can't foresee, and it can have its impacts on a schedule that you can't see because calendars are in the background. And then another one, I know, Charlie, you just run into this recently, where your time impacts or your impact analysis are restricted to just you're comparing them to a baseline. These are just some basic things that will be that should be addressed or be identified if you're having specs you're implementing specs that can cause difficulty for a contractor, number one, in developing a plan, in monitoring the plan, and obviously resolving delays. These can be problematic as well. So the key is to, you know, once again, looking back at the overview, of what we've discussed today. We've talked about the preparing schedule specifications, defining objectives and considerations, looking at the various risks associated with schedule specifications, and how we can manage the risk of the project using the specifications, and primarily dealing with delays, and then avoiding problem specifications that can hinder the planning process and the dispute resolution process. So now we have some questions. We have some time for some questions. If you have any questions, feel free to enter those into your question panel and your panel. I have a question here from Phil. Do you feel it is important for the owner schedule reviewer to have had experience actually creating a schedule of similar scopes themselves in order to review a contractor schedule? I think that's actually a very good question. Charlie, you want to take a stab at that?
No, well, I would think it would be a good thing, obviously, to have a background or an understanding of what the contractor is going to go through. We mentioned earlier, sitting down with the contractor, discussing what the risks are in the project, but also understanding the application itself and the process of developing a schedule. I think that's pretty important for the owner's representative to have that type of skill set in order to discuss apples and apples with the contractors. They're beginning to go through that same process. So I would think so. What do you think?
Well, I think so. I mean, you have, normally this is not something that would be spelled out in the specifications. But I do see a lot of specifications that were obviously not prepared by someone who has had experience in building schedules, you know, and it becomes pretty obvious. But that can hinder too. I encourage owners definitely to consider getting the expertise that they need, not only to you know, address issues in the schedule, but you know, there are some very, very good schedule analyzer programs out there where you can run a good analysis on a schedule, and you can you know, identify issues. But it takes someone who understands the scheduling process to really be able to sit down and help both parties to work through those things, once again, for the good of the project, to help have a good plan and for resolving those issues even further. That's about all the time we have for today. We will provide access to the webinar as we mentioned earlier. I'll turn it back over to Dan. If you have anything to close out with, Dan.
Sure. Just wanted to say, you know, thanks for attending. Like John said, we appreciate your participation in the survey that will launch at the close of the webinar. And if you're in a group, and some of you are, please take time to get input, you know, from that group. And then once again, about an hour from now, an email will be sent out with a link to today's handout. If you didn't get a chance to download that, it'll also have a link to complete a certificate of attendance. And please feel free to reach out to me if I can provide more information for you regarding some of Encore services or project lifespan services with Charlie, also our sponsor, Project Networking. You may want to check that out. They have some free accounts. You can just give it a whirl if you want to do that and start documenting your jobs from your laptop or your mobile device. And once again, thank you, John. Thank you, Charlie, and Project Networking, and thank you all to our attendees. Look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.